If you have any questions on the subject we discussed so far, inshallah ta'ala, before we go to the Zakat part. Yes?
So my first question is, anything after Isha is considered Qiyamul Layl?
No.
So, and we know that the last one third of the night is the most precious time.
Mm-hmm.
So, should we focus on praying more after Isha, or save it for like to take rest and pray?
No. So the question is, we know that the best time of Salat al-Tarawih, Salat al-Qiyam is the last portion of the night.
Right.
However, anything you pray after Isha until Fajr time is considered Qiyam. Qiyam means night prayer, that's what it means.
Right.
However, the ulama, they divide Qiyam to two portions. Whatever you pray after you wake up from sleep, they call it tahajjud. Because it's harder to do it. It's harder to go to sleep and then get up to pray. So that's why it's called tahajjud. And the tahajjud is usually done in the last portion of the night. It's more virtuous to do it in the last portion of the night because the Prophet ﷺ said at that time of the night, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in a manner that suits His Majesty, descends to the earthly heaven and He gazes at His creation and asks them to have any dua and a request, and Allah is willing to answer and forgive them. So, that's why we say that it's actually the best part is the last portion of the night. However, Aisha also said, "Min kulli al-layl qama Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam." The Messenger of Allah, he did qiyam from every part of the night. So sometimes he did after Isha, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes the late portion of the night. So which one is better for me personally? Whatever is more convenient for you. Some of us, if they go to sleep, they're not going to be able to wake up until Fajr. So therefore, it's better for them to do the qiyam before they go to sleep. Others, no. They like to do it later so they can wake up early before Fajr time. So they wake up an hour before Fajr to start their day. So they do the tahajjud, and then they do their witr, and then they pray Fajr, and they start their day after that. So whatever is convenient for you. If you ask me about the best part, is always the last part of the night. Wallahu a'lam. Any other questions, Iman? Yes.
If a person has the opportunity of change their schedule during Ramadan so they can spend the whole night awake, but then they spend most of the day sleeping. I mean, the night awake to read Quran and to pray, but then as a result they will spend most of the day sleeping.
Are we talking about the last 10 nights?
The whole month.
The whole month?
I mean, if a person has the possibility to fix their schedule, would that be okay, or will it be better to try to keep a regular schedule like the rest of the year?
So, which is better for me, to keep my schedule regular in terms of my working hours, my days sleeping versus, waking as normal hours during Ramadan, or should I switch my schedule to stay up during the night and sleep during the day? That is better in the last 10 nights of Ramadan.
Okay.
It's better to switch so that you're up all the night and you sleep and you take rest during the day. But in the first 20 days of Ramadan, no, the days are more virtuous, generally speaking. But in the last 10 nights, the nights are more virtuous in the month of Ramadan. So therefore, it's better to switch and swap direction in the last 10 nights. But also still, even if you're going to be staying up all night in the last 10 nights of Ramadan, that doesn't mean to stay asleep all day during the day. Especially since it's going to be, the day is going to be, it's getting longer right now. So therefore, you still make sure that you spend enough time also awake. So I highly recommend for people to stay up after Fajr, for example, to do their Qur'an until sunrise, and then go to sleep, and you wake up at Dhuhr time, and that's it. Then if you had to take another nap right after Asr, a little bit, just before Maghrib time, so you could refresh, and then you start your night, inshallah, to a strong bin al-Azr. That's the best kind of format of schedule to do. No.
So it's okay, like if the person is waking up around Dhuhr, that's not considered like they wasted the whole day?
No. If he's taken a nap, Abdullah ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, he said, I take a nap, and I hope for the reward for this nap, as much as I hope for the reward for waking up at night. Because that gave me the power to stay up at night. No. Sure. Last question, go ahead.
I have a list of du'as before Ramadan, but in sujood, it goes so fast during Taraweeh. How do I make the du'as in such a short time?
Are you going to be coming for Fajr tomorrow? No? Because tomorrow, inshallah, Salat al-Fajr, I'm going to be given a khatira after Salat al-Fajr tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. I want to dedicate that on the subject of dua. What is the dua, how to do it, what to say, when is the best time, and the etiquette of dua in general. So we're going to talk about this after Fajr tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. And Fajr is at 6:45. For those who like to come and join us tomorrow, inshallah, 6:45 a.m. Bidnillah Azza wa Jal, if you can. But if you're not going to be coming for your question particularly, diversify your dua. And then, since you don't have control over the length of your sujood, if you pray in jama'ah with the imam, make sure to do your own salah after the imam is done. So you don't have to finish with the imam. Instead, just pray by yourself, 2 extra rak'ah, 4 extra rak'ah, and make your sujood long, and diversify your dua. So make sure the first sajda in the first rak'ah, I'll make dua for myself. The second sajda, I'll make dua for my parents. The third sajda, I'll make dua for my spouse and children. My fourth rak'ah, I'll make dua for the community, for example. My second 2 rak'ahs, later on, I do other du'as and so on. Diversify your list of dua, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam. Bismillah.
So we're going to have a question and answer as well after the zakat portion. Hopefully the last 15, 20 minutes. So if anyone has any questions, write it down so you don't forget or in a note.
I think we don't need that because if you're going to be facing the
No. So I need the whiteboard, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Zakat. Zakat is a very misunderstood topic at times. Very overcomplicated. It's really not complicated. People overcomplicate it. And so we want to do in a way that's not insulting whatsoever. What we're doing is zakat for dummies kind of approach. And I'm the biggest dummy here. So zakat, linguistically, means to grow. But it's ironic because you're giving out of something that you have so that it grows. The best example I can really give is something the sisters know about and the guys have no idea. If someone's trying to grow their hair, what are they supposed to do? Sorry? Louder?
From the bottom, I guess.
They cut the what are they called? The split ends. They cut the split ends and then it starts to grow. So the person starts out like Vin Diesel and he ends up like Jason Momoa, right? That's zakat. You're taking the split ends, 2.5%, and the growth starts to become in bunches. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَمَا أَتَيْتُم مِّن رِبًا لِيَرْبُوَ فِي أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ فَلَا يَرْبُو عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. That whatever riba you consume to take multitudes, they're not going to grow in the sight of Allah. وَمَا أَتَيْتُم مِّن زَكَاةٍ تُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَ اللَّهِ. Whatever zakah you give, you're looking for the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're looking for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُضْعِفُونَ. Those are the ones who are given these multitudes, these exponential multipliers of whatever they had before. And the angels, they call out in dua where they say, Allahumma a'ti munfiqan khalafa. Oh Allah, give the one who is giving in charity more than what he gave. And the one who withholds, they make dua that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not let them have multitudes in their wealth. So that even the angels are praising the person who gives in wealth. Zakah, linguistically, is to grow. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. You're nurturing it, right? You're nurturing the soul so that it grows beautifully. And it's something that grows the wealth and it grows the barakah of the wealth. It turns off the fire of greed inside the person. And it is a testimony, it is a testament to the person's faith on the inside. Prophet ﷺ says, وَالصَّدَقَةُ, do you guys remember? In Riyadh Salihin, وَالصَّدَقَةُ burhan. A sadaqah is a testament of a person's belief. And so you're declaring what you believe inside. You say that you believe, but you're bringing the proof, saying that I believe, and so you're doing a sadaqah. For those who attended our tafsir and our after Aisha talks, how many times is zakah in the Quran paired with salah? You guys remember?
82.
82 times. 82 times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. And so salah and zakah are inseparable. We spend so much time talking about the importance of salah, and zakah we have no idea. That is a disparity that's not supposed to happen. because both are very virtuous and very noble. Shaykh read Surah Al-Layl in Salat al-Maghrib. Surah Al-Layl was revealed because of a zakah that an individual did for another. You guys remember the story? Abu Bakr, when he freed Bilal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Al-Layl. And Ali radiallahu anhu, when he gave in charity, according to some of the narrations, they say that Surah Al-Dahr or Surah Al-Insan, هَلْ أَتَى عَلَى الْإِنسَانِ حِينٌ مِنَ الدَّهْرِ, that was revealed in that occasion as well. And so zakah is an extremely important topic that is overlooked by many. And it's not treated, we shouldn't treat it like a tax, right? You know, when you go through your taxes, TurboTax, that's not how we should treat zakah. In reality, when we're looking at the numbers and calculating the numbers and going through all that, we should have the drive on the inside to say, you know what, I'm going to give more than what I actually owe, so that I attain the maqsad, the actual purpose of zakat, which is not just the person purifying the money, but also establishing a sense of brotherhood between the believers. When the people who are in need are constantly in need, and a growing society where the gap between the rich and the poor starts to grow, and the middle class, as they say, starts to shrink, you start to have a sense of spite and hatred. And actually, according to political theorists, they say that is what prompts revolution. That is what prompts a social revolution. Islam actually minimizes that distance between the rich and the poor, hence the zakah, and it's proportionate to the person's wealth. Right? So it's a percentage, it's not something that's a fixed number. As I say, it's a flat rate, 2.5%, as we'll mention in a bit. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions also, لِكَيْ لَا يَكُونَ دُولَةً بَيْنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ مِنْكُمْ, so that there isn't a partition between the rich and the poor, rather, the middle class is much larger. And those who are extremely, extremely rich aren't taking the vast majority of everyone else's wealth, and most of the people are in poverty. That's one of the elements of zakat that's extremely important. It's a building block of the Islamic society as a whole for its success in its existence. For it to really exist successfully, zakah has to be established. If zakah is not established, then what happens is you get a little bit of a sense of greed. Right? Shuh is present there, hidden in people's hearts, in people's nafs, and nafs that calls to evil. And so the person puts that away by giving in that zakat and protects the society with that, and it also increases brotherhood and love and compassion between believers. So that's zakah. Zakat and sadaqah, when they are separate, they're actually synonymous. They're synonyms. Zakah and sadaqah mean charity, generally speaking. However, there are certain conventions that became well known. So people would say that sadaqah is more general, meaning any kind of khair that a person does, even the person that feeds his wife or feeds his family. We mentioned the person who's, when the wife is cooking and you put in the date. Got reminded about that after. Right? That is the sadaqah. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, hatta luqma, right? The food that you put in the wife of the food that you put in the mouth of your wife, that is a sadaqah. Even something as simple as that. Even a smile is a sadaqah. It's a charity for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they say the sadaqah is more general, and zakah is something specific in number, and specific in when to give and how to give it, and specific in the person to give it. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So zakah, we mentioned the why. Why zakah? Because it purifies the wealth, it helps it grow, it does it in the right way, societal reasons, it protects the society and brings people together, increases brotherhood. And it also has these essential building blocks for a successful Islamic community. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us in that. Who are the people that have to give zakah? And who are the people that receive? Well, before we talk about that, we have to understand what type of zakah we're talking about. There are two types of zakah, generally speaking, conventionally speaking. There are two types of zakah. There is zakat al-fitr and zakat al-mal. Zakat al-fitr is the zakah that you give at the end of Ramadan. You guys by now, alhamdulillah, you're used to it, and usually towards the last 10 days we talk about it a lot. So we don't want to spend too much time talking about it. The idea is that for every head in the family, right, even the unborn baby, you give $10 to $15, depending on what the number is. I think we mentioned it was $10. So So it's $10 that you give to the masjid will distribute it for the poor people so they eat on the day of Eid. The point of that zakat al-fitr, is that the people who are poor have something on the day where everyone else is celebrating. Hence, brotherhood and love and compassion, and that nobody feels left out. That's the point of zakah here. For zakat al-fitr and zakat al-mal, it's the same concept. That nobody feels left out, nobody feels distinguished from, nobody feels that there's like this enmity or classism between people. Rather, everyone is having fun on Eid. Even the poor people who don't have anything, forget about it, don't worry about it. We're all going to have fun today. And so that is one of the reasons why zakah. Now that's zakat al-fitr. $10 per person, even the unborn baby, the head of the household gives it on behalf of his household. As for zakat al-mal is a little different. Everyone has to give from zakat al-mal if they reach certain conditions. The conditions don't have to do with puberty, like salah, for example. A person has to reach maturity. Once he's mature, then they have to pray. It's wajib upon them to pray. Zakah is not like that. The child who has a lot of wealth in his name, his guardians, they're the ones that give it from on his behalf. And so it's something that he has to give as well. However, there are certain conditions that have to be met for the person to be, it's mandatory upon them to give zakah. What are these conditions? The first condition that we have is that the person reaches something they call nisab. Something they call nisab. What is nisab? Nisab is something they call a threshold. You guys know what a threshold is? When you reach a certain point, after that, the person has to give that zakat. But what do I mean by that? What I mean is that you aggregate, you get in the sum, you collect the sum of everything that you own for the sake of selling. Everything that you own for the sake of business. So for example, if I had a M8, right, that I use for my own personal pleasure. I don't have an M8, but that's a nice car. If I have an M8 and I'm speeding down the highway and it's like this beautiful 6-figure car, but I use it for myself, do I have to give zakah on it? No. If I own 1,000 properties and I own them not because I want to sell them, I own them because I'm living in them, right? Do I have to give a zakah on this? No, I don't.
You got 1,000. If you're living in 1,000 different houses.
It's private property. The person doesn't want to sell it. It has some other reason for it. The person doesn't give zakah on it. If the person has, for example, a house that he is living in, and he has furniture, and it's like a gazillion-dollar house, mashallah, right? In Alpharetta. Prices are crazy here. Does he have to give zakah on it? No, he lives in it. If the person has, and according to the majority of scholars for the sisters, if the sister has jewelry that she uses usually, right, she's usually wearing this kind of jewelry, she's not storing it to sell it later or anything like that, according to the majority of scholars, there's no zakah on this. Why? Because it's for your personal effects. If a person owns a business, and he needs certain instruments for his business to function, not because he's trying to sell, but he's utilizing those assets so that his business is sustained, for example, like a computer, or a car, or back in the day, a horse, you don't give zakah on these things, because they're not to be sold. They're for your personal use. And so what you consider to reach that threshold is anything that's used to trade. Anything that's used with the intention that you're going to trade it. That's what it boils down to. Now, the types of wealth, a lot of the scholars talk about the types of wealth. Is anyone here a farmer? No? Does anyone own camels? Okay, then those two types of wealth, we're not going to talk about them. We're going to talk about two types of wealth. Cash and cash assets. I'm using that term loosely. So for example, investments, cryptocurrency, all of these things are what sum to what we're going to call your net worth, right? Your net worth. The person would say, for example, I have $1,000 in my checking account. I have $100,000 in my savings account, mashallah, right? I have a 401k that's reached whatever amount. You sum up all of that amount at a certain point, we're going to mention that in a second. At a certain point, you sum it all up. As long as you've sustained a threshold for a specific time, then you have to give zakah from that amount. Is that clear? Does anyone not understand what I just said? Don't be shy. So you have to have a certain amount, you sustain that certain amount, and at the end of a certain time, that is the zakat, that is what you calculate your zakat. That is what we call nisab. The threshold that you have to sustain for a specific time that will make you, it's mandatory upon you to give zakat. What is the threshold? The threshold, there's a difference of opinion among scholars for today's application. For today's application, because everything it goes back to the dollar, and the dollar goes back to the military complex, right? Whatever you want to call it, right? The dollar is comparable to what? Is it comparable to silver, or is it comparable to gold? Difference of opinion among the scholars. And each one second, slow down. 1 second, whichever one you compare will actually change what the nisab is. So, some people who say it's silver, they're going to have a different number that they're going to come down to. And those who say gold, they're going to have a different number. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, for the 20 dinars?
I'm not sure about dinars now, it goes by grams.
We'll go by the grams. I know it was the dinars and the dirham. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned a certain amount of dinar, a certain number of dirhams. The dinar, or the gold coin, the weight of it is equal to 85 grams. This is for gold. And the silver, if a person has silver, because they used to use two types of currency. They used to use silver, like change, and they used to use gold as like the bigger currency. And you mentioned silver. I think you mentioned 200 coins and 20 coins. So the silver would be 485 grams of silver and 85 grams of gold. So 20, I think it was 20 coins and 200 coins. If the person had that amount, then they would have to give zakat from each one if they reached the nisab, if they reached the threshold. But I ask you this, the dollar is like which one? Is it like gold or is it like silver? And don't tell me inflation is like silver today.
Gold.
It's originally actually compared to gold. Originally, there was the gold standard. Now, there is no gold standard. In 1971, they got rid of it. But each country has to have a certain gold amount for their currency to be valued, right? And so, it seems like gold is the stronger opinion. What's 85 grams of gold in dollars? I don't know about the prices now. That's always changing, but it's roughly...
Today it's actually 5,262 fraction.
Okay.
I just Googled it right now.
Roughly 5K, plus or minus.
The reason why I Googled it because actually, just few days ago, actually, as a matter of last week,
It's
it was
shooting up.
$100 less.
Yeah, it's shooting up right now. So time to buy gold.
Well, too late. It's actually going up now.
It'll go more.
No, it's gonna go more, right?
Yeah.
No.
So invest in gold. So or buy more.
It might say also last year, Chef. Last year was actually 4,700 something.
That's what I remember it to be. Yeah.
Just same time, March last year, the 85 grams was 4,600 or 700 something, and now just from few days ago, it jumped $100 extra.
May Allah protect us. 485 grams of silver is way less than this. I think it's like, what is it? I think it's somewhere around the 200 and 400 ballpark.
I'm not really sure.
Someone can Google it, but it's in the hundreds. So if we were to compare dollars to silver, then the person who has a couple $100 and sustains that number for a whole year, at the end of the year, he has to give zakat. When you compare it to gold, which does seem to be the stronger opinion, they have to stay over $5,000 or 5,200, what was it, 17? 5,200 something dollars. You stay above that limit for one whole year, then you calculate whatever you have at the end of that year, and that would be your zakat. And that leads me to my next point, which is in Arabic called, it's really weird when you read it in English, but it's called al-hawl. Al-hawl means the year that you sustained the nisab. Al-hawl generally means the year, right? But it's the year that you've sustained that nisab. And the year we're talking about the lunar year. So is zakat al-mal bound by Ramadan? No. But we'll get to that in a second. At the end of the year, now the person is in debt to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's in debt to the faqir, or the person who's in need, that he gives them that portion. He has to give them that portion, and it's in his dhimma, meaning it's a responsibility upon him to give a certain amount. Does anyone have any confusion with regards to this? So we calculate the lunar year, and we maintain a threshold for that year. Before the year ends, let's say I start out, mashallah, $7,500. But then I get into an accident. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. And I end up, or not even an accident, my transmission goes bad. And I have to, after 3 months, I fix my transmission. It costs, I don't know, $3,000 or $4,000. I went under the threshold. Then, now I don't have to give zakat. Then maybe 2 months later, I go back up. My savings goes back up and it beats that threshold. That's when the clock starts ticking again, and I go one more year. At the end of the year, I see how much I give, and I give the amount. Or how much I have, and I give the amount. And so that's zakat, right? We're talking about who and what kind of, within this blend, has to look at all his assets and how much he has, and at the end of it, he is the one who has to give the zakat. Wow.
You said investments. So if you have investment properties, is it the value of the total investment of the portfolio, or is it what you're making per month? You hold that for the whole year.
So the dividends versus the, you would look at the value of it at the end of the year and whatever profit you made. Whatever dividends.
He's talking about rental.
Rental properties?
Yeah. Like investment
Oh,
property.
okay. So if you're renting a house, you don't give zakah on the value of
No. If you have a portfolio of investment properties that you make money from.
Yeah. You look at the value of it, and whatever profit that you made, that's also at the end of the year you would count. As long as you stayed over the $5,000. If you're renting out an apartment, if you're renting out a house, you don't give zakah on the value of that rental. Rather, you give it on the profit that you make from it. So al-hawl is that 1 year mark, 1 lunar year. Okay? Yeah.
On that 1 year mark, if you, like you said, your car broke 2 months after and then go back up, do we have to, do the zakat?
If it's before the 1 year, no.
Before the 1 year?
No. Once you hit it again, then you start counting income.
Yeah.
If it's after, you have to give the zakah. Yes.
This can happen multiple times within that year. Let's say that it went down, it went up.
You start the clock again.
So every time
Every time it goes under, and then it comes back up, you start counting again. If it goes under, you stop counting. If it goes over, you start counting again. You have to stay above $5,000. Think of that like water, and a person is swimming, and his head is underwater, then he does not give zakat. As long as his head is above water, he has to give zakat.
You should take zakat when it's underwater, right?
You should take zakat. More than one type. Like, so as far as what the person gives from, it's obviously we mentioned his cash and his investments and anything he wants to use to sell. That's what you look at. You sum it all up and you would give from that zakat. Obviously, there's with regards to harvest. Does anyone farm? You know, camels and cows and sheep. That's a different discussion. Yes, sister.
I have a question. The very first thing you said that if you have 100 homes and you're not planning to sell them, but they're yours, so you don't pay zakat on them?
No, you live in them. They're for your life.
When
You're not
you-
using them to sell or deal. If you have the intention as an investment, then there's zakat. But there is no intention for investment. You're living in it.
In 100 homes, you're just living there?
The Jannah on earth.
It's a very extreme example, but yeah.
If I may mention some of these examples right now, today, for instance, you live here in the U.S., okay? You have a beach home in Florida, for example, and you have an apartment in Pakistan, and you have, alhamdulillah, you have somewhere also in Mecca or on one of those resort areas that you have an apartment for you. You own all that stuff.
Okay,
Like-
and you utilize it as you vacation and stuff?
Vacation stuff. So
Okay.
they're not for sale. So
Okay.
therefore, these are your property. You don't pay the account on that. Once you start renting them out,
Okay,
for example, Airbnb, for instance, or just putting them out for rent and so on, you start paying profit on, you're paying actually zakat on the money that you get out of it.
Okay.
So that money you get it out as rent or again profit. You put it into your cash assets altogether. If it goes above the 5,000, it's part of the assets that you pay Zakat on.
Okay, so just on the rent, not on the value.
Not on that.
Yeah.
No.
So,
Is that-
question, what about those that use their residential home as Airbnb? Like,
From the profit. The profit that they make, as long as they stay above this number, which is, it goes back to their cash money that they have. They don't look at the price of their house. Let's say the question's
Let
outside.
me clarify some people seem to be confused about one thing.
Yeah.
One thing about Zakat that you guys understand, the difference between Zakat and taxes. You pay Zakat on what? I mean, you pay tax from what? From your income. It doesn't matter how much is left in your pocket at the end of the year. The government is going to go and see how much you earned throughout the year, and you're going to have to pay this much money, regardless if you have it in your hand or not. So they don't care if you have it or not anymore. As Zakat, you pay on your excess wealth. What does that mean? If I'm earning 100,000 a year, I'm earning 100,000 through what? My salary is 50,000. I have a few investment homes that I get Airbnb and rent that gets, mashallah, more cash here. I do some business here and there, I get extra cash from here. I sell and trade and get some cash over here. Overall, my income goes to 100,000 throughout the year. But by the end of the year, I spend and paid my expenses and so on. I'm left with $3,000 in my hand. That 3,000 right now is not nisab. So you're not going to pay zakat even if you earned 100,000 throughout the whole year, because Islamically you pay on the excess wealth. But when do you need to pay zakat? If I'm now owning 5,000 after I paid everything off, I have 5,000 in my hand, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Now I mark my calendar for the next year, right? Throughout the next year, I also did the same thing. I earned money, I rented apartments, I did this, I did that, and my money kept fluctuating, but it never went below 5,000. By the end of the year, the next year, my money that I have in my hand is actually $6,000, which means I was able to save an extra 1,000 for this year. Now you pay zakat on the 6,000, because this 6,000 right now is an extra wealth. It's an excess wealth that you didn't need to use. It was just sitting there for nothing. Same thing, the next year, you earn another 100,000 in that year. But by the end of the year, your money that you stayed in your hand became 12,000. So you're able to have enough wealth and save more. So you pay on the 12,000. So this is what the zakat is. You pay on whatever excess wealth that you did not use and was just sitting there. And that's why if you use the excess wealth that you had in your hand and it dropped below the 5,000, you broke the nisab. So you no longer need to pay zakat for that year. You calculate again the calendar. Once it hits that, it goes up to the nisab one more time. So if I had to use my savings, that means I'm no longer wealthy enough to pay zakat. No, I'm now on the verge of receiving zakat money. But alhamdulillah, I was able to recover throughout the year. Yes, I dropped below 5, but I was able to survive until it became 7,000. But I need to start counting from the time when it became 7,000 right now for the next year. So again, the zakah is different from the taxes. Tax is in your income no matter what is left in your hand. And the zakah is the excess wealth that stays in your hand for a whole year and more. So if you're able to sustain a $5,000 and more in one for the whole year, that means, alhamdulillah, you spend so much and you're wealthy enough to spare 5,000+. Okay, share some of that 5,000 with the poor. That's what it means. Sorry. No.
So, what is the amount that you do? 2.5%. That is the amount. Why do we say 2.5%? Because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Rub' al-ushr," 1/4 of a tenth, which is 1/40th, which is 2.5%. That's where we get that number from, because the Prophet ﷺ said so. Why is it a specific number? Why is Dhuhr 4 rak'ahs? That's the Sharia. This is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright, so I'm a rich guy, mashallah, I got 5,000, 6,000 bucks, mashallah. It's relatively rich in these days. Right? I sustained it for a whole year under the Biden regime of taxes. I have that money. What do I do? How do I give it? The how of zakah is what leads us to this pretty diamond. When I want to give zakat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in the Quran, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ عَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned 8 types of people. Primarily, it's for, and the genre of all 8 types of people, which are the people who are travelers, the people who are in debt, the people who are absolutely, they're absolutely in need, where they're begging, they don't have enough for the day, which is al-faqir, or the person who's struggling paycheck to paycheck, al-miskin, right? These people, the one who doesn't have a living, but the one who's not capable of sustaining that living. All of them generally, the genre of these people are that they're in need. One way or the other, they need help. And so, you can we'll reference the ayah at a later time. I don't know the exact number. Chef, you can help me out with that one.
It's ayah number, chapter 9, ayah number 16. 60, I'm sorry, 60.
9,
60.
60. Surah At-Tawbah, ayah 60. There are 8 classifications of people. The ones that you need to know are the poor, the needy, the ones in debt. And these are generally what we refer to. These are the people that you give the zakat. So what does it look like? How do I give my zakat? At the end of the year, say, all right, I have $100,000, mashallah. All right, I have to give how much? $2,500. Very good. $2,500. That is the amount. That is the bare minimum. Obviously, you want to give more, right? Because it's something that is, there's a spiritual twist to it. It's not just a tax that you're paying the government. $2,500 is the amount that I owe to the person. How do I give my zakat? There are very different ways that you can do it. You could either give it to RCM, Sister Jumna will help us out with that, inshallah. She's a distributing agent. You could go to any other website, send all over the world and do this and that. But I want you guys to be a little more conscious of dealing with this, just like how you are emphasizing salah, just like how you are emphasizing your dua, just like how you are emphasizing your siyam. Be as particular and calculating and intentional and spiritual in your zakat. Now those eight types of people, how do I prioritize which one? Who do I give? How do I do it? There was an interesting categorization that one of the scholars mentioned to keep into consideration with that money and who to give it to. He gives 4 types of people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَىٰ بِبَعْضٍ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. The blood relatives, they're not all the same. Some of them are closer in kinship, and some of them are further away. The father and the son and the father, they're the closest. As for the brothers and the siblings, they're a little further. As for the uncles, a little further. The cousins, a little further, right? So there's a prioritization. But that prioritization is also to other categories. And one of the descriptions that I heard that was very nice is that you look at 3 different things, or 4 different things, and you look at the closeness of each one of these things. That will help you look at where you can give your zakat. By the way, you don't have to give all of it to one person. The person that you're giving it to doesn't have to know it's zakat. It can be in the form of a gift, and it can be done at a later time. So you can delay giving your zakat as long as you've extracted it from the rest of your wealth. You put it, like for example, in an envelope, or whatever it may be, or a separate bank account or something like that. And at a later time, for example, Ramadan, you can give it to the people that you know, because you want the barakah of the time of Ramadan. You want to do it during Laylatul Qadr, whatever reasoning you may have. So what are the 4 classifications? He gives you, Sheikh Nabulsi, he talks about, I cannot English today.
Choose Arabic, I'll translate.
He gives you something called closeness. We're talking about qaraba, closeness. He says there's 4 types of closeness that you want to consider when giving your zakat. The first is kinship. It's more noble. It's more noble in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that a person takes care of his family before he takes care of the stranger. Generally speaking, doesn't have to be the case all the time, but we're just talking about parameters. The person who takes care of his family, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned silatul rahim, connecting the family ties. You mentioned in the khutbah today, forgiveness, right? Forgiveness is bringing people together. The family is the most important unit to sustain and maintain. The relationships between family members and cousins, people fighting over inheritance, people fighting over property, people fighting over God knows what, that is not from the deen. The deen is actually forgiveness and compassion and closeness with the family. There shouldn't be this kind of enmity and spite between people. And if money is the thing that is breaking people apart, then you should be the one to say, you know what, I'll let it go for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because blood is more expensive than gold. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you guys. Kinship, they mention with regards to Zakat al-Mal, generally all of the scholars agree that you cannot give your parents and you cannot give your children because you're inadvertently giving yourself that money, right? However, there's a difference of opinion, and it seems like contemporary scholars are adopting the opinion that you can give your siblings if they're in need. So for example, my brother is struggling, and we both have our own families, we both have kids, we both have households, but he's struggling. He's in debt, he's almost going to get foreclosed on his house, whatever it may be. I can bail him out with Zakat al-Mal. I can give him from my Zakat al-Mal, according to contemporary fatwa. Contemporary fatwa, they take this opinion. Cousins and uncles and further away, all of them agree that you can give them from Zakat al-Mal. It's the siblings that there's a little bit of a difference of opinion. Contemporary scholars, they say. So you take the closer family members over the person who's a stranger, unless you want to take other factors into play. No? No, you can't give your spouse. No. So the spouses cannot give zakat to each other. That's not from
The wife can give her husband.
well, the wife can give her husband.
But the husband cannot give his wife.
Hasab al-Khalid.
No.
Anyway, so the closeness. Boy, if you're getting zakat from your wife, I'm judging you. So we have kinship, qarabat al-nasab. And then he says, qarabat al-faqr, poverty. The one who is more in need is more rightful to give than the person who's less in need. The person who's struggling and they have clothes and they have food, but we're going to look at the pyramid of needs here. They have clothing and they have food. They're struggling, but they're there. But the person who's about to die of starvation, the person who's about to die of you look at the person who's in more need. So you look at the next parameter, which is poverty. The third parameter is proximity. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he says, Jibreel continuously tells me to take care of my neighbor until I thought that he's going to inherit from me. I thought he was going to inherit from Jibreel. Jibreel keeps telling me about al-jar, right? Wal-jari dhil-qurba, wal-jari al-junub, right? The neighbors. It's almost like they're family. And fil blad, they're pretty much family, right? If you go to Palestine, you go to, Pakistan, they're pretty much family, right? The neighbors. The neighbor. And I want to emphasize something. And I know it's noble to take care of your family. For example, overseas, you're trying to take care of them and stuff like that. But I remind you of the maqsad, of the purpose of zakat, to bring the community together. If your brother or sister is praying right next to you in salah and is struggling, and you know they're struggling, and you're outsourcing while they're struggling right next to you, he's your job. The communities within the vicinity of RCM who may be struggling, they're about to lose their houses, they're not capable of getting on their feet, and you're outsourcing, and that has barakah to it. It's acceptable. It's not bad. And some communities overseas are struggling. The brothers and sisters, the Uyghurs and the Palestinians and the people in Kashmir and all in India, right, Gujarat, and what they're going through. People are struggling, and it's all over. It's a global issue, but at the same time, don't forget about your brothers and sisters here. Proximity is important to consider when it comes to zakat. The last that he mentions is the closeness to Iman. Now, we don't know what's in people's hearts. We don't know who's good and who's bad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. But there are certain clues, there are certain hints that we can kind of, look at. And he mentions the example of a person who's drinking alcohol versus a person who is trying his best to avoid those things. You would probably prioritize the person who would avoid those things, who has a closeness to Iman. He mentions this as one of the things to consider in your calculation. These are not set in stone. This is a deduction of a scholar that he's giving. It's not necessarily, you don't have to take this and run with it and say that, okay, this is exactly how it's going to be. It's more of something to consider of how do I look at zakat. The idea is that it is an organic element of the relationship between believers, Muslim believers. That there is this level of attention that you're putting, where you're putting your money. You're being very attentive, you're being very calculating. You're saying, you know what, this is just as how Hajj, Sheikh, I don't know, have you led the Hajj groups that they come in tears, they're saying, you know, like, did I break my Hajj if a piece of hair fell out? And they're so careful over their Hajj. They're careful over their fasting. Oh, by accident I went by a water fountain and I drank water. They come in tears, did I break my fast? Right, which you didn't, by the way. But, you know, just as how important that is for you, take this as something just as important, where you're trying to build the bonds of the believers and connect them together with zakat. And so it's really important to think about all that we mentioned. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more scenarios like the husband and wife situation. And other examples that are a little more detailed. You can ask, if we run out of time, we'll give it another 5-10 minutes, inshallah, for the rest of the questions. If you have any specific situations about your investments and your stocks and whatever else you have, you can email me, and then I can get back to you about that. But the idea, the concept, is that this ibadah, this noble ibadah, during the time of Ramadan, is a very blessed thing to do. And we want to be very, we want to emphasize it and put in a lot of our attention to it and a lot of our blood, sweat, and tears, where we go out and look who's suffering within our congregation, within the people that we know. Maybe they'll give off the impression that they're doing well, but as soon as they get in the car, they don't know how they're going to fill up their tank. They don't know how they're going to get home. They don't know what they're going to do with their children. Umar ibn Khattab has a very beautiful story, and I want to end with this story, Sheikh, if that's okay. Umar ibn Khattab, the Khalifa, the king, president, the leader of his people, would go up at night. He wouldn't be able to sleep. He was worried if a donkey would, may Allah bless you guys, he was worried if a donkey would sprain his ankle in Iraq, so far away that he can't even reach it. That's how worried he was of the state of affairs of the believers. One of the most beautiful stories of this amazing, splendid Khalifa, this successor of the Prophet ﷺ, the one who, the Prophet ﷺ and the scholars, they mentioned that if there were another Nabi, it would have been Umar. Umar radiallahu anhu used to utter phrases that would later be immortalized in the Quran itself. Right, where he mentioned, for example, the ayat that you mentioned knocking on the door. Umar ibn Khattab was the one who wished that ayah would come down, and it came down. He's the one who wished that hijab would become mandatory, and it became mandatory. He is Umar radiallahu anhu, who would walk a path, and shaitan would run away. If anyone had the luxury to sleep at night, it would be Umar. But what was Umar like in his khilafah, especially in his old age? He got up one night and he couldn't sleep. He's like, let me check what's going on. And at the time, there were a lot of refugees that had come to Medina. He started to walk between the camps and say, who are the people in need? What's going on? No one knew who he was. No one knew who he was. And he walked by a lady, and again, these are refugee camps, right? So they have their tents and she's outside. And she's stirring a pot and it's clanking. Clickety clank, right? There's rocks inside. And her kids are around her crying. They're hungry. And he's walking by and he sees that and he's with his servant. He says, what's going on? What are you doing? She says, I don't have any food. I don't have anything. I put rocks in water so that my kids think I'm cooking and they fall asleep hungry. Umar, in that moment, he said, what's going on? Why hasn't the money reached you? He didn't say that he was the Khalifa, but he put in policies to take care of the poor, and maybe some things fell through the cracks. And she said, this Khalifa that we have, he's not taking care of us and this and that. She started talking about Umar without even knowing that it was Umar radiallahu anhu. Umar immediately said, I got you. Took his servant Aslam and he ran to Bayt al-Mal and he started to fill the sacks with different food and barley and this and that, and he filled it up. And as he's lifting on his shoulder, Aslam says, no, hold on, I'm your servant, I'll take care of it. He's like, are you going to bear my weight on the Day of Judgment? Are you going to bear my weight on the Day of Judgment? So he lifted up on his shoulders and he walked to the lady and he started to cook the food with the lady, taking care of her. And He took care of that family. And then he went on top of a hill and he waited and watched as she's waking up the children and as they're eating. Aslam was like, all right, you did your duty. You even cooked the food. What's left? He's like, I'm not leaving until I see them laughing, just as how I saw them crying. That's zakat. Taking care of each other, taking care of the Muslim brothers and sisters. That's the spirit of Islam. This ibadah has a huge element to it that brings people together. By the way, later that lady came to the court and she found that Umar was the Khalifa and she started to apologize to him, not knowing that it was him. He let her go for that. So this is zakat al-mal, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all. No, we can do questions and answers. Yes.
So on the poverty thing, so how do you gauge, like you said, sometimes we know which family is struggling, but sometimes we don't know. We know that, they're not rich, they go paycheck to paycheck. So what is it that, like how some people say someone who is, doesn't give zakah and they're needy, they're recipient, how can you assess?
May I just make comment on this? So, to comment, so the question, how do we recognize that this family is poor or rich, or do they deserve zakah or otherwise? Especially in our time today, we have to differentiate between those who are poor by circumstances and those who are poor by choice.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of people today that are poor by choice. And I mean by that, poor by choice because of their lifestyle. They are living way above their means. And then they start crying and struggling for people to pay off their debts and their bills and so on. I mean, if you can't afford this car, why do you have to put bills on this thing? So therefore, those who are actually poor by circumstances they have the priority in the community. But those who are poor by choice, I mean, sell that car. Send it back. You don't have to pay that bill. You don't have to buy a $50,000 car if you can afford only $5,000 car, for example. If someone is living in a $1 million house, and when they can only afford $600,000, for example, or even $200,000 house, or even they cannot even afford buying a house. So again, those who are putting themselves in such severe debts like this, when they can get themselves out of it, we guide them to do really money management. That's better for them, better education. Can we help them to get out of an immediate situation? Yes, of course, we can. We'll help them with the zakah immediately. But not sustain their lifestyle and sustaining their choice for poverty in that sense. Those who are by circumstances because of their level of education, socioeconomic status, jobs, factor, whatever that is, those are the people that we give them a priority in terms of giving them zakah. Wallah. How do you recognize that? Once again, ask, see what people say, what do you know about them? And if you couldn't tell, then go and give it to an organization that will take care on your behalf and you'll be free, inshallah, of liability. Wallahu a'lam.
Let's take from the brother. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I think you were raising your hand. I saw you raising your hand. I'm looking at you. Were you raising your hand or stretching it? No. Okay, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
So I had two questions. One, let's say for example your wife was like gifted jewelry or something, back to the point of paying zakat on assets that you plan to sell. And it's traditional where you kind of just pass that jewelry down, generation by generation. Is that something that you would pay zakat on, the value of that jewelry? Uh-oh.
So in some cultures, if I must say just that typical culture, in some cultures, the gold has been, mashallah, handed over from generation to generation, probably from the time of Adam alayhi salam. And that gold has been given to the older son, when they get married, and then they give it to their older son when they get married, and then they give it to the older son when they get married, until the day of judgment. Right? In short, yes, they pay zakah. Because not now it's actually treasure. Because what usually happens in these cultures sometimes, the mother-in-law gives it to the daughter-in-law, and the daughter-in-law wears it, mashallah, on the wedding day, and then the next day, it's gone. What happened to that gold? Disappeared. Went in a safe in a bank or something like that. Why? I need that gold. Well, inshallah, for your son when they are born, inshallah. It's treasure, no doubt about it. So that's why we say it's treasure. But if it was used frequently, or every now and then there's an occasion you get it out and use it, and it's in your possession personally, then that's a personal thing. If it was given to you by your mother-in-law, and your mother-in-law just keep it basically in a safe, or your husband keep it in a safe so no one would use it afterwards, it's a treasure. But if it was given to you and you're using it at your own convenience, and even if there was no occasion for it, then it's no longer, you don't need to pay zakat on that. Let me just make a disclaimer over here. According to the Hanafi school, you pay zakat on the gold and the jewelry no matter what. No.
I think Muhammad had a question.
If there is a short-term debt you have to pay, and you know it's coming up, for example, taxes, would you deduct that from the amount of money you're paying out?
Money that you have to pay or money that is owed to you?
Money that you have to pay.
If it's short term, you consider that in your calculations. If it's long term, no. So for example, a house financing that's 30 years long, you wouldn't consider that.
You only deduct the monthly payment. You only deduct the monthly payment on the due time.
So
Now,
whatever savings.
just clarification for that. Once you calculate your zakat, your asset now, and you have, alhamdulillah, let's say $10,000 in your possession, that is above the nisab. After a full year, you have to pay 2.5% of the 10,000, right? But usually it's not instead of 10,000. Instead, you check your liabilities on that time, that due date. What liabilities do you have in that money? I have my car payment, I have my student loan payment, I have my rent payment, I have this, I have that. So when you calculate all of that, the 10,000 drops down to 6,000. So do I pay zakat on 10,000 or 6,000 right now? You pay on 6,000. Only 6,000. What if I want to pay off my car? I have 5,000 in my car, for example. If I pay off my car completely, and my money drops to 1,000 right now, so in this case, I don't pay zakat at all, because my nisab is gone. Allah, just to make it clear.
Sister in the back.
So, two questions. If I set a date like this, do the calculations on January 1st of every year, and instead of going and looking and seeing if I dipped or I didn't, can I just look at my number and calculate all of it and just pay on that? Is that permissible?
I don't understand the question.
What numbers is it?
So you said you calculate your net worth essentially, right? And if it's above 5,000, that's what you're paying the 2.5 on. So if I set a date every year, January 1st, I do my calculations, can I just every January 1st look at the number instead of going and looking at the entire year span to see if I dipped or I didn't dip?
Because if you the first thing is the solar calendar isn't what we calculate by, right?
So
We
it's
go by
Shaban
the,
4th or?
yeah. Now the only issue with that is that if you did dip for whatever reason, and then you rose again, you start counting from where you rose, not any date that you pick.
Right.
So once you beat the threshold, then that's actually when you start counting. Does that make sense?
Asking if you can surpass that, because I have the same
Yeah,
question.
essentially.
So if you assume that you're gonna go over,
Let's say that you do go over, it doesn't, she's just trying to figure out if it matters for you to have to go back and calculate from that date, or if you can just use the set
Can I
date.
rephrase the
And if
question?
you're above the threshold, just pay your zakat.
On that
Based on
day
that.
and
If
not
I
keep
may,
track
So
of
to
it.
pay in advance?
If I may rephrase the question, it's similar to saying, can I pay zakat before the due date? So for example, if you know for sure that you got your amount of nisab, let's say in June, for example. So the zakat calculation would be in next June. However, I don't know if I'm going to keep remembering actually next June. So easier for me to remember January 1st, every year. And alhamdulillah, I'm wealthy enough to know that my money will never dip throughout the year. So I know for sure I'm going to be actually, alhamdulillah, above the nisab for the next maybe 10 years, for example. So can I just go with January 1st and start giving the zakat? For that first year, you'll be paying the zakat assumed for the entire year. And then you start setting the clock at January every single year.
Right.
So you can do that now.
Okay. The second question I have is, let's say I had a baby recently, and she got gifted like gold coins and like really old necklaces and things like that, that she's never gonna
How
wear.
old? Adam alayhi salam age?
Close. But, is it calculated from her Zakat or is it calculated from her parents' Zakat?
So is that hers, or now it's considered family asset?
I don't know. Her mother gave it to
Well, you're the
me.
parent, congratulations first.
Thank you. So,
No.
It depends on what. So culturally speaking, like some cultures will say, well, no, until وَمَالِكَ لِأَبِيكَ, right?
Yeah.
You and everything you are is property of your father, kind of like a communist mentality. I'm joking, by the way. It's a hadith. If the person thinks, culturally speaking, that money is theirs until they're old enough and it becomes, they basically gift it back to their kids, then they would consider under their assets. If they say, no, out of amana, this is forever theirs and I will not touch it, then it would be considered for the property of the child.
One more thing, if I may add, one last thing right now in terms of the zakat. Who should pay the zakat? Let's say the lady, she has gold and she's storing it for as a treasure or for safekeeping here. And she owes, let's say, $300 zakat money on that gold. Can she ask her husband to pay off that zakat money for her? Or does she need to pay from her money if she has extra money? And actually, it doesn't matter who pays the zakat, as long as you do it on your behalf. It will be charity on their part, and setting off your obligation of the zakat, and it should be okay. So if the lady, she goes, look, if I'm going to have to do it, I'm going to have to sell some gold. And I don't want to sell my gold. So could you please maybe pay off my zakat? And the husband volunteers that, alhamdulillah, should be okay, inshallah. That's fine. Wallah.
Well, in most cases, well, Imam, my money is her money and her money is her money.
Survival instinct.
In reality, in Islam, each person has their own asset. They're actually considered separate. But that's a different discussion, inshallah, we can have about marriage.
Inshallah. Actually, share a question. What does he have?
Yes.
If I have a family member who's not Muslim, who's in poverty, can I give my zakat or should I just give sadaqah to them?
Yours?
I don't know. I'll withhold from answering this one.
So the question, if I may say, actually, the question is about if I have a non-Muslim family member who's poor, can I give them the zakah money? Or should I give them only from the sadaqah? If they fall under the category of al-mu'allafati qulubuhum, those whom we're trying to bring their hearts closer to the Islam and the Deen, inshallah ta'ala, you can give them from the zakah. If you feel that doing that, knowing that you becoming Muslim, you're becoming a better Muslim, a better person, and that makes them look just like subhanAllah, their manners, their Islam is making them better people. So it brings them closer to the Deen, that's okay to give them the zakah.
I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
If, now, for instance, I'm an American Muslim, and I may have close relatives, like children or something like that, that are not Muslims, then can I give zakat to them?
They're still your children.
I'm sorry?
They're your children?
Yeah, if I had children.
They're still your children. You don't
Okay.
give them zakah, you take care of them.
Okay.
Because it's an obligation to take care of your children and your ancestors. Wallahu a'lam.
I also have another question, sorry, that was asked to me from a convert, that when this person accepted Islam, he had already enough money in the bank, higher than the nisab. So he was asking if he should start counting his year from the time of his shahada or from the time that he had the money in the bank.
From the time of the shahada.
From the time of
Because that's when
shahada.
it becomes obligation on them.
Okay.
Now, if you want to give more and it's charity, alhamdulillah, it's good to do, inshallah. You guys want to pray Isha or pray Fajr?
Jazakallah khair. We're going to continue the discussion tomorrow about dua, inshallah, after Fajr.